And I will jump right on into it. Here's how I wanted to start this morning, and that's with a little bit of scripture that is very, very familiar. And here we go. It's in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. It continues that the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Or as Eugene Peterson translated it really beautifully, God became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. So this is the principle that I want to keep coming back, so don't forget it. As Kathy said, if I haven't met you, my name's Devon Bailey. I'm the director of Youth Ministry here. And to be totally honest with you, I had to ask myself a few times if I'm the best to present on this topic. We're going to be talking about civil discourse and having hard conversations with people we disagree with. And y'all, I can get this wrong often. I believe I was asked to present because over the years, I've made it a most painful habit of regularly talking to people who believe differently than I do. I'm not hesitant with confrontation, and if I see something that I think is wrong, I'll say so. But I try not to insult people, and I try to make space for conversation. I also try to remember my own story, which we'll get into in a moment. But there are some insights and some practices that I hope can make us all a little bit more helpful with something that is so important and yet incredibly difficult to do, especially in divided times like these. All right, so talking with people we disagree with, I would argue, has become more and not less difficult. You see, I have this theory that maybe, possibly, we're not actually talking to people at all. See, the truth is, we're receiving insights about people we may not be engaged with every single day, people we may not actually know. And if they are people that we know, we often associate them with the greater narratives that we are receiving. You know, oh, that person voted for Trump. Well, then they must hate black people. Oh, that person voted for Hillary Clinton. They must want babies murdered. We're constantly viewing headlines and seeing memes and 5-minute videos that are meant to emotionally move us and typically to outrage us. And we live in that outrage all the time, and it shapes the way that we have our conversations and even our willingness to do so. And so first, I just want to ask us to pause and reflect on how we politically understand those on the other side of the aisle. I want you to consider what has formed your opinion of those people. How much of that opinion is rooted in experience, and how much of that is rooted in the media, memes, and echo chambers? Is it actually conversations and relationships that you are getting your ideas from? When you think of those stuck in their ways Republicans or those radical leftists, is it a face of someone you know that pops up? And if it is, have you decided that all people in this category are like this person? We are quick to associate all people who think this way as what I like to call the faceless they. It feels almost uniquely American, you know, those Republicans, those Democrats, those immigrants, those evangelicals, those protesters, those police. So often we attach the worst perception to the people we are the least engaged. And the truth is, it's easier that way, and it makes us feel good. It's the good bad binary. All of us do this. It's exhausting to have to explain things with nuance and distinctions and caveats. We want the fast explanation, right? We want the quick way to explain something. This is good, that's bad, this is in, that's out. But the problem is, and I think we've all realized that, is that we all seem to categorize our view as good and the opposing view as evil. It stopped me in my tracks one day to consider that both Christians who support same-sex relationships and who are against same-sex relationships believe that the persecution they receive is for God. They believe any anger they receive is simply because they are being obedient to God and the other person is not. You see, it's so easy when talking with people we disagree with to quickly categorize them or their argument as either evil or stupid. When we believe that the moral truth is so obvious and so plain that the only way to disagree with it or to not understand it is either they are a bad person or an idiot. And if you've reached that conclusion, it's going to be nearly impossible to have any meaningful and level-headed conversation. And so instead, what I want to ask each of you to do is to consider your story. And here's what I mean. Do you believe the exact same things you did 5 years ago? Is your favorite comedy from the 90s still kosher to you? Or maybe there's some jokes in those movies that we don't socially accept anymore. Or how about this? If you're white, do you believe the same things you did 6 months ago? Was that person 6 months ago evil or an idiot? Or have they not yet been forced to reframe the way that they understand things? God became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. We may have a lot of ideas and words about certain groups of people, but make sure that you know them as flesh and blood. In fact, start there. And so to have some fun with this idea, this is me. This was election day 2008, and I dressed up as John McCain for my high school. However, this is also me. This is me. This is also me. This is me. This is also me. You see, I feel uniquely positioned to have this conversation because I have believed and argued passionately nearly all political views. I've argued conservative views to liberals, and I've argued liberal views to conservatives. And never in all of these things was I trying to be mean or evil. And often I didn't totally agree with the candidate that I was voting for, but I feared the direction of the other movement and where that would lead us. And y'all, I think we can understand right now more than ever that there's a lot of things that we would compromise for that belief. And so the primary reflection that I have for you, this is the primary reflection I have for you, is how do you understand things? And why do you understand them that way? It's not hard to know that we accumulate data throughout our lives and shape and form our beliefs and values. Your understandings may come from your Bible, your church, traditions, experiences that are rooted in your culture, your community, your nationality, your religion. It might come from research and data from sciences. The things that we say we know, the truth, the morality, they are all informed by these. The point being simply that I cannot know what I do not know, and what I do know is shaped and based on the limited experiences that are available to me. For me, I grew up just south of the Georgia border. My mom took me to the Florida Capitol to see George W. Bush win the recount. I was 10 years old and held up political signs that said, "Sore loserman." In 2008, when Bush's tenure was ending, I was a senior in high school, and I believed wholeheartedly that America was a Christian nation and that Democrats passionately didn't want it to be. I thought Obama was likely more Muslim than he let on, and it baffled my mind that anyone would choose him over a war hero like John McCain. And I was not in the minority of my community either. My peers in my part of town were predominantly conservative. The values I held were held by nearly every single person that I knew. You see, I believe that to vote for a Democrat was to vote for socialism, to vote for the murder of unborn babies, for the destruction of the biblical family, marriage, and values. And I did not believe it was possible to be a Democrat and be a Christian. And in kind, I felt it was the duty of my faith and my nation to stand against Barack Hussein Obama. College opened me up to countless diverse experiences that surpassed the limited experiences of the bubble that was my conservative area of town. I was having dialogue with people I'd never gotten to know, and this exposure, under this, my understandings, they began to change. And then fast forward to 2015, I'm living in DC, and I'm waiting for hours in the cold just to get a glimpse at President Obama. You see, the human experience is not static and unchanging. Many of you know we now have likely considered, many of you who know me maybe have never considered that I was once your adversary. And regardless of your personal views of Barack Obama, you can see that over time, I was able to weigh the knowledge of my home community with the knowledge and experiences of a greater community, a more diverse community, and a more diverse Christianity. My understanding evolved based on who was now in my life, new information, discovery, experience, and most importantly, conversation. I did not know then what I know now. You see, Democrats, black people, and gay people, instead of simply being words and ideas, became flesh and blood, and they moved into my incredibly difficult and stubborn neighborhood. So, what I want us to understand is that every human being that has ever existed is just like this in one way or another. It may not be political, it could be a child's blatant fear and disgust of green foods. Sometimes experiences are withheld from us, and sometimes we demand that people reach the point we want them to go without the grace of leading them to a first step, just like you had to do. It's like demanding a person enjoy coffee after their first sip. Sometimes more exposure changes our beliefs or our taste buds, and sometimes we've yet to see something that liberates us. But here's the real thing I want to drive here. Sometimes we build entire identities, communities, and values in places of ignorance that have yet to receive certain information. And often we look out at those unlike us and we create narratives to discredit or vilify them. You know, growing up, I learned really extreme, kind of slanderous and vilifying beliefs about Democrats. It wasn't simply that I disagreed, but that I was given a framework to understand the other in such a way that kept me from even wanting to associate or learn from them. And, you know, it's that faceless they had to learn from me. And that made conversation nearly impossible. The only way to move away from this kind of dualism is to train your mind to see the whole spectrum. But even then, I would argue that we still have biases that we have to confront. So this is what is at play for every single human being. And we have to understand this if we are going to have meaningful conversations with people that we disagree with. This is the truth for the person we think is complicit in the worst kinds of evil. We are all on a journey, and where we are, how we've been raised, how we've been hurt and which voices we invite shape us. And I spent a lot of time on this, and it's not that profound, but this is the foundational truth. This is the grace. It's remember your story. Because most debates are about making things better and a disagreement about how to do that. It's morality. If people care about something, there is emotion attached to it. There's a passion to see it achieved, and there is anger at what they perceive is in the way. In any good conversation, both will show their face. Yes? In any good conversation, both are going to show their face. I once heard an evangelical pastor phrase it this way: debate the worthiness of the idea without infringing the worth of the person. But my caveat to that is that it's important to know that some ideas are about the worth of a person. And so what do we do then? See, there's also the famous quote from James Baldwin, who says we can disagree and still love each other, unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. I just simply want to acknowledge that this process is messy, and there are debates about whether it's even worth your time and energy debating someone who disagrees about, say, another person's humanity, which is how many of us have come to view politics as a whole. It's social justice. I have friends I trust who often say it's not worth the energy engaging the racist. It is better for a movement to give energy to those who are open to learning and growing than those who are debating and on the opposing side of things. While at the same time, we hear from marginalized groups that they want us to use our privilege to have those conversations with our racist uncle. You know, for example, it would be argued that it's not worth my time debating someone who, after everything that has happened, still says, but all lives matter. In Charlottesville, Virginia, at an earlier rally that featured the Ku Klux Klan, most people who were present there were there to boo and to curse and flip off and scream at the Klan. And I struggled a little bit with this kind of environment. And I was asking a question that I feel weird about asking now, but I was asking myself, does love wins apply to the Ku Klux Klan? And so I struggle with that, but I still believe the answer to that question is yes. Father Richard Rohr says that the best criticism of the bad is a practice of the better. A few weeks after that rally, I came upon a similar scene in Charlottesville, where a man named Jason Kessler and his group, the Proud Boys, were protesting outside one of my favorite bars. And people were yelling at them and cursing them, and spitting on them. And my approach was different. I asked him some questions. And the first was, you say you're not racist. Why do you think all of these people think that you are? And when he argued about free speech and that he should have the right to say anything, I asked him if he was a Christian, and I shared the scripture, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. I asked him about his views of America, and when he said he believed white people built this country, I asked him what room the labor of African American and Asian Americans had in that story. You see, I challenged his ideas with questions, and eventually he got frustrated at his own inconsistencies and walked away. Finding my place. I asked him questions to better understand a person that was so hated. And I believe I was able to see and connect to the person I was talking to, unlike those who were screaming. And was able to see that he was honestly just a really sad person. Someone dealing with extreme loneliness who had found unity with other sad people and being persecuted for a shared cause. And so they sought out that persecution because it reinforced their community, and they found a purpose in that. See, the outrage served their martyrdom, and so they created it. But did anything change there? I don't and I can't know. He still organized a rally that killed Heather Heyer and scarred our nation. All I know is that by talking to this man, I was able to see pain and hurt in a person that I am very tempted to hate. I was at the Women's March and a Mexican man saw my jacket and on the back that it had read, "Confront White Supremacy." And he was a counter-protester wearing a certain hat and asked if I thought he was a white supremacist. And based on the ideas he was sharing and things he was upholding, I responded to him that I did think he was upholding white supremacy. And he laughed and he said, "How can I be a white supremacist, dude? I'm Mexican." To which I responded, "I work for a church, and in my life, I've known many women who don't believe my female pastor should be a pastor. I know many women who support an anti-woman view of patriarchy, and I believe you are doing similar." We talked for over an hour asking each other good questions, and at the end he said, "Wow, I actually really appreciate talking to you. I feel like you explained things in a way I'd never heard before," and he thanked me and shook my hand. Remember shaking hands? So was that worth my time? I've historically been very open about what I believe and what I'm learning on social media, and people regularly engage these ideas and we'll talk. I've had people who once called me heretic years later send me a private message because I'm one of the only people that they think they can talk to. I've had people who've debated my beliefs about racism, the Bible, or sexuality reach out after years of conversations and apologize and say they get it now. I share that because I want you to know I have hope for this moment when it's tempting to not. I have hope for our division. My own story is a constant reminder that everything that pisses me off can change. But it's a long game. And this insight is why I have more patience with people. You see, violence and insults are quick and they do work in a way. I'm not going to say they don't. But it always swings back and it always compromises yourself. Let modern politics be the example. I do still, however, believe that we go further and the change is more lasting together. However, I want us to distinguish something really important, and let's call this problem, when they go low, we go high. There was a popular meme going around responding to this sentiment, and it said, "When they go low, I'll go medium. God's still working on me." I'm not sure if you noticed, but in her convention speech, Michelle Obama actually had to clarify something with this statement. And so I want to pull that up real quick and take a look. And give me just 1 second.
Do now? What's our strategy? Over the past 4 years, a lot of people have asked me, when others are going so low, does going high still really work? My answer, going high is the only thing that works. Because when we go low, when we use those same tactics of degrading and dehumanizing others, we just become part of the ugly noise that's drowning out everything else. We degrade ourselves. We degrade the very causes for which we fight. But let's be clear. Going high does not mean putting on a smile and saying nice things when confronted by viciousness and cruelty. Going high means taking the harder path. It means scraping and clawing our way to that mountaintop. Going high means standing fierce against hatred while remembering that we are one nation under God. And if we want to survive, we've got to find a way to live together and work together across our differences. And going high means unlocking the shackles of lies and distrust.
I don't know if that came through clearly for everybody, but maybe you saw that. So here's how I'll summarize what she was saying. It was clear that she had been confronted over the years with, when things are so terrible, do we still take the high road? Here's what I think she was arguing in this video, and I'll sum it up by saying, if I can get this to work. There we go. If social harmony means submitting to lies and racism, then it's not peace, but oppression. We cannot honor the humanity in one another when we bow down and nicely submit to systems and movements of oppression. When we simply allow such harm with silence for the sake and tradition of being respectful. You see, nothing changes if we don't talk. There is privilege in niceness and in silence. And when they go low, we go high means having the conversation and getting in the way. I will try to be patient with any person. Love is patient and kind, but I will not be patient with someone else's justice. Always remember that while you are needing space and time to process another person's humanity and the systems that harm them, people are dying because of those ideas and the injustice that is upheld. There's an urgency that transcends being nice or respectful. Get in good trouble. Priority goes to ending the violence, and violence is not just a punch, but a policy. See, we have to understand this, and this is why not talking is still a statement. Dr. King's section from his letter from Birmingham jail has become more and more featured in the last few years, and he writes, I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate who's more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. We favor our comforts, or even our rest over the needed justice that is actually peace. And so not talking about politics is often working against justice because politics is the affairs of the people. And if we're not talking about it and engaging it, we're not shaping it for the better. And so how do we do it? I'm going to wrap all of this up, all that set up with this, and some specific points, and several I'm stealing from a man named Jared Bias, who has a book coming out, I think this week, called Love Matters More, and I hope you'll get a copy of it. I'm going to start with, I believe God is not just with us, but for us. And so I remind people that while I may be against an idea, I am for them. When things get off track, it's okay to reset and remind them that you care about them and that you want both yourself and they to succeed. There are times in my conversations where I may realize that both our voices have just climbed in volume, and we're getting angrier at each other. And I'll pause and apologize and try and bring it back. We can apologize for our attitude without compromising our belief. And so what is our goal in discussing politics? Are we going to change someone's mind? Rarely have I made it to the end of a political conversation and the parties walked away with changed minds. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I am saying if that's your goal going in, it's a stupid goal. It's a stupid goal. Rarely is there winning in political debate, and knowing that, maybe there's a better goal to guide us and keep us on track. I believe that even if I fail at that often, the goal is relationship and connection more than conversion. Because if we don't have those, is anything going to be fruitful, really? See, this is why I rarely get into it with strangers on the internet. Or if I do, I tend to ask questions about who they are, why this matters enough to them to comment on a stranger's post. I want to make a connection with the person and build something good as much as I want to change their mind. And so what is the goal of political conversation? It's a more connected people, capable of holding diversity and challenge. Make those connections. And if that's the goal rather than conversion, your understanding of each other will deepen, and you might find more peace having reached that understanding. This is why I think some people have reached out over the years after our debates, because we had a connection and we didn't compromise that. The second is people don't resist change, they resist loss. When I went to college and majored in religion, my professors quickly went to war on the concepts that I had been raised to believe about the Bible. They showed me plainly things that were not supposed to be possible if what I had been raised to believe were true. And what I believed was not just true, but my ultimate truth. And for the first few years, I easily dismissed them as atheist professors who God had not blessed with eyes to see, because this was easier than considering that they might be right and I might be wrong. I became a Bible thumper in response to them. My beliefs became more aggressive. For me to accept their beliefs, the most foundational and fundamental compass for my life would be broken. It wasn't the fear of change that kept me from accepting what they were teaching. It was the fear of losing my certitudes and my order. And that's a scary thing. This insight helped me understand that most debates with people who come across more stubborn than others are actually about loss. And so try and find that and have empathy for that, because it's difficult and they are losing something that has been meaningful for them. A lot of times the anger that they're expressing in their ideas is a grief of losing that idea. And so they are outwardly protecting it. They're holding on vigilantly because they are afraid of the pain. And this is often grief, not evil. The next is to ask good questions. What if I told you? What if I told you that the best conversation you can have with a person is the one where you seek to understand before you seek to be understood? I fail at this all the time. And this is partly because, personally, it's easy for me to say that I used to understand and argue conservative beliefs, so I don't need to show someone this courtesy because I already get it. This happens with my mother all the time, and she once called me out saying I was more capable of having a conversation with a literal Nazi than I was with her. Like, that's an indictment. I've found that it's easier to do this with strangers than with people I know well. Good questions are also a way to challenge ideas and help people see if they are being consistent or not. Try to avoid leading questions because we all know when that's happening and it's a belittling feeling. The next is rephrasing. Make sure you understand what they are actually saying. Regularly check that you are not misunderstanding them by rephrasing their argument and asking if you got it right. Here's what I'm hearing you say. I love the distinction that they need to agree with how you describe their belief before you can have a helpful conversation about it. And I see this all the time with the word racism, where I understand it a very particular way, and so when I use it kind of freely, the other person may get offended because they use it a different way and think I'm talking about good and bad people rather than a system of power. It's easy to put words in people's mouths and argue straw man points by making them say the extreme. And so I just say allow and give nuance and track with the point they are making rather than the extremes you might associate with it. Use I statements rather than we statements. When we say I feel, we allow some humility and ease to a conversation rather than intimidation, like you need to see it this way. This is how we see it. It's a more personal way and a humble way to talk to a person rather than language that just kind of hangs up and says, get it or leave. There's an exception to this. Also, avoid some of that you or blame language, right? Like, well, you always do this. The exception to the I feel language is, of course, if you are, in fact, an expert in your field. Like Dr. Fauci doesn't need to say, I feel like you need to wear a mask. He can say, wear your dang mask. And the last point is boundaries. I've learned that there are some conversations I cannot have with my parents because their feelings quickly get hurt. And when we spent an hour on a political conversation instead of checking in on each other and updating our lives. And so I've started throwing out a pause when I see it going that way and saying, is this where you want our phone call to go? because this is an out. If you don't want to do it, here's the out. And I'll say up front that if I hear something that I think is wrong, I'm going to confront it. That's true no matter who you are. And I loved how Jared Bias, he used the language, the boundaries are the space in which I can simultaneously love you and me. It's okay to say up front what you need and want out of a conversation. And if the other party is unwilling, then it may not be a conversation you need to have. For example, if a person is unwilling to make that connection point, I usually won't go there. And I also say, have a boundary with your capabilities. I had a mother comment on something I wrote the other day, and she had a gay daughter, but she was telling me that she believed her daughter was living in sin. And honestly, y'all, if she's willing to stand against her own daughter, it's incredibly unlikely that I, a stranger, was going to change her mind. I offered her some resources rather than spent my whole day debating her. You don't have to allow people to abuse you and exhaust you or harm you with their words. There is biblical precedent for dusting your sandals off and moving on. You do not have to compromise your humanity for a conversation. Hold to your boundaries. And allies, understand that you can serve those you love by informing yourself and having these conversations so that those most hurt by them don't have to do the hard emotional work if they don't want to. And so, to close all of this, here's the kind of wrap-up points. Remember that there's a world of information out there, and our communities shape our beliefs. In order for some beliefs to change, they need incarnation, flesh and blood, not just information. God became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. God met us where we are at in terms that we could understand. And like God, we meet people where they are at and understand the human journey of growth and discovery. People have to discover things themselves. You know, like try telling a person that they're in they need to leave their toxic relationship. That never happens. You know it doesn't. And so I love the advice of create a holding environment for those discoveries. One that is safe, but uncomfortable. Celebrate the small wins and acknowledge growth, and remember that your goal is connection and relationship, and that you need to grow too. Work against the faceless they, get uncomfortable yourself, and walk humbly. I said earlier that nothing changes if we don't talk. I want to leave you with nothing changes if we don't listen. Some of the most radical shifts in American politics have happened because rather than listen to people, we ignored them and insulted them. Dr. King said that a riot is the voice of the unheard. Don't you think for a moment that a riot is only expressed in burning buildings? That a riot cannot be a political upset of an ignored and insulted people? Look at our country. We have to learn to listen as much as we need to learn to talk, and I'm speaking to myself. Every time that I think this work is not worth it, I remember my life and how much connection to those I disagreed with helped me grow as a person. It changed me completely, and it changes me completely. And so the invitation I leave you with is, may connection lead to diversity, and may diversity lead to peace and understanding.